Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of Rasa Office Hours. I'm just going to double check that I am muted in my other computer so we don't get awful echoes. Pretty sure I am. We'll find out in a couple minutes, I guess, once the stream catches up. I am joined today, and there we go. Okay, sorry. I see the first stream. Fantastic. I am joined today by Felicia from the research team. And do you want to talk a little bit about what it is you do in Rasa and specifically, and welcome to a very special edition of Rasa Office Hours. Hold, please. There we go. There was, in fact, echo. I have fixed the echo, I hope. Okay. Do you want to talk really quickly about what it is that you do at Rasa, and specifically, because this is about the 2.6 release, sorry, the 2.8.8 Rasa open source release, which
2.8.9.
I was so close. 2.8.9 Rasa open source release. I want to say Rasa X, so looking at your shirt. No, 2.8.9 Rasa open source release, which updated TensorFlow to 2.6, and yeah, Mina, your involvement with that decision, and then how we came to the decision that we needed to do that in the first place, and then yeah, just kick it off. And as folks have questions, feel free to ask the questions, and I will insert them in.
Cool. Yeah. So I am on research, like Rachel already said. I did an office hours earlier this year. So yeah, this is not my first time, gladly. Yeah, these past couple of months, longer than I had thought going into the project, I've been concerned with our upgrade of TensorFlow. Previously, we were on version 2.3 of TensorFlow. And back in, I want to say like January or something crazy long ago, we discussed that we wanted to upgrade to 2.4, and then we realized there was a bug blocking our upgrade that was fixed in 2.5. Then we started trying to target 2.5 for our upgrade. And when we were running some routine kind of model regression tests to make sure that nothing broke during all the changes that we made to the code to be able to upgrade to 2.5, we noticed that they were taking a lot longer than usual. So we, of course, had to look into that, and it took us a while to pinpoint what we thought was the problem. We noticed pretty quickly that it seemed like configurations with diet classifier and entity recognition turned on were experiencing slowdown. So then we narrowed it down to our CRF layer. Mm-hmm. And finally, we narrowed it down to a specific TensorFlow operation. And before anyone gets confused, it is our CRF layer, but CRF entity extractor is not affected because that doesn't use a CRF layer, unlike what you might think. So yeah, then we communicated that slowed down to TensorFlow, and they've been really great. We've been kind of in touch with them, and they've been working on a fix. We're hoping that that'll, that we'll be able to have something to show for that soon, but it hasn't happened yet. And so we decided to release the upgrade anyways, just because it wasn't becoming sustainable for us to stay on 2.3. Mm-hmm. There were a number of security issues that were found with 2.3, and these were fixed in subsequent versions. There's actually significantly fewer vulnerabilities now, and the only ones that are in 2.6 are pretty low risk. So that was definitely necessary from a security standpoint, but since we haven't figured out how to fix the performance issues, it's a trade-off for sure.
Definitely. We also have a question from Norbert. He wants to know about M1 support. I'm just going to open up that can of worms.
Yeah, that's a very good question to ask. So one thing that does come with the upgrade to TensorFlow 2.6 is that there is a special Apple build of TensorFlow starting from version 2.4 that allows you to run TensorFlow on an M1. Um, what is a little bit tricky for maybe Rasa users is that the special build for scikit-learn is not currently available on pip. According to their website, that's something that they want to, or that they are working on and are hoping to release soon. But right now, the only way to do that is to get scikit-learn running on your M1 is to install from Conda Forge, which isn't currently compatible with how we install dependencies. It's a little bit of a mess. So we don't have a way to install using our make commands. We have been talking to some community users that are looking into this for themselves. So I think we're hoping that we'll come to a good workaround for people, but as of now, it's a little bit fiddly.
Yeah, and I would say that we definitely know that a lot of people are using the M1 chip and would like Rasa to work on it. And it is not that we don't know that it's a problem, and it's not that we have not looked into it and are working on it. It's complicated, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we have developers even within the company that would like this to work on an M1. So it's definitely a priority for us. It's just, yeah, a little bit fiddly.
Yeah. Dependency hell, I think, is the way that people usually talk about this particular problem.
Yep. That about describes it. Yeah.
Well, Robert says, there is a way, sort of. I mean, sort of. Yeah. Yeah, it's obviously not the experience that we would want for folks.
Yeah, I think the dream would be if we could have this set up just like any of our other dependencies in our poetry configuration and just have like a nice little command for people to run. We're not at that point yet, so.
Yeah, but it is. I would say that this is one of those things that, like, it's a known issue where we would love for it to be fixed as soon as possible as well. A question from Shida. Okay. So this is a little bit off topic from the TensorFlow update. So let me know if this is one that you want to handle, Felicia, or we can take it to the forums. Wants to know, why can't I install Rasa X with pip install on Windows?
I don't know. That's outside of my skill set. Sorry. I don't really, I'm wearing the shirt, but I don't really work with Rasa X too much. Just because I do research, and when I make new, or when I come up with new features with the rest of the team, they usually start by going to open source. So sorry about that.
I would say probably for Shida, probably the most involved dependency on Windows is the C++, which you can't install via pip because it's not Python. You have to install it separately. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about potential slowdowns, and I know there's also a blog post, so keep an eye out for that. But you mentioned specifically it was with diet and entity extraction. So for those of you who haven't used diet, it's multitask learning. We do both entity identification and identity detection. Oh my gosh, what's the one that starts with I? It's a label on a turn level.
Intent classification.
Yes, exactly. It does both intent classification and entity extraction. Yeah, do you want to talk about some potential workarounds people might have if they're noticing really big performance hits because of the upgrade?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing they can do is use the CRF entity extractor. That's not too different from using, or use it in combination, sorry, with diet, but have entity recognition for diet turned off and instead have the CRF entity extractor. That's not too different from the original config. Of course, it's not exactly the same thing, but that is one workaround that should work because, like I said, it's a problem with the CRF layers that are used in diet. So if you turn entity recognition off for diet, it won't have those layers. And then you can do entity extraction with the CRF entity extractor, or we have a number of other entity extractors for depending on what kind of entity you're trying to extract. So that's one workaround that should work for people.
Nimish wants to know if we can answer any science-related question. No, probably not. Questions about Rasa open source 2.8.9 and TensorFlow 2.6 is our current topic. But thanks for the vote of confidence, I think. And Shida says, thanks, no problem. Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm glad we could help. I have a question about Camembert from Amina. In order to use Camembert, I have to downgrade transformers to 2.5.0 and add some instructions from, it looks like the Hugging Face library. Do you have any idea how to have the latest versions of transformers in order to use Camembert? So I think this is the transformers library from Hugging Face. Question about an integration there. I don't know if you've worked with it much.
Yeah, so I believe that we're on version 2.11. So 2.5. I'm not sure what our lower bound of compatible versions is. Do I have any idea of getting the latest? I mean, I think the latest is quite a lot. I think the latest version number is higher than 2.11. That's a tough one. I'm thinking maybe that I would need to look into that further. Maybe that would be a good forum question, because unfortunately I don't have the dependencies in my head, or maybe fortunately. So
there's a lot of dependencies. It's
yeah.
Rasa is mature software and it uses a lot of things. That's how I would put that. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there are like maybe other ways to use a Camembert model that would be simpler, and I don't know of any off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm curious about why it needs to be downgraded, whether it's just not, I mean, maybe we could work with that, why it needs to be downgraded and why it needs special instructions. Because I'm thinking what could be the issue, and I've helped people out on the forum with this same, or a very similar issue, is that the language model Featurizers, which is what we use to load the Hugging Face models, doesn't support every single one. So what you can do is extend that to support different models. Usually that entails kind of figuring out what sort of pre and post processing that particular language model needs. It's usually like adding some sort of special tokens, like class tokens and things like that. So that's not too difficult, because I think you can look at like the original component for inspiration and guidance. So it's more like copying and adjusting than it is like having to write a whole new component. So that's one thing that maybe could work.
Yeah. If you haven't already posted about this on the forums, I'd also recommend that, because then you can share more information. I don't think you shared your Rasa version, so it could be that you have a Rasa version that's old enough that it was using a version of the Transformers library before 2.5, and this is actually an upgrade request. I don't know. It's hard to say without more information.
Yeah, if it's a request to update the Transformers version, then I'm not entirely sure whether we already have an issue for this. So you can feel free to make an issue in our repository, and then we can kind of assess what's needed for that.
Yeah, yes, please. Because I know we have a lot of folks using French who would probably find that pretty helpful. and did the copy and adapt and needed to downgrade transformers. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'd file an issue about that. I also think this is the first that I've heard about it. I don't know if you've, it sounds like you haven't heard about this issue either, so I think it would be good to get it in front of the prioritization stage
Yeah.
of the engineering team. Rasa version 2.7 did post on the forum. Okay, yeah, I would maybe do a GitHub issue as well, because it sounds like this might be. This doesn't. This sounds like something where the good solution might be on a framework level rather than a solving your specific problem level, if that makes sense. I didn't make my second coffee. I apologize if I'm a little a little slower today. Yeah. So I know that one of the things that the TensorFlow team is working on, of course, is compatibility across operating systems and different chipsets. So M1, I know there have been a couple of long-standing Windows bugs that are slowly being addressed, which is great because I develop on Windows, as some of you may know. Yeah, are there any other sort of things that we have? Are there any other sort of I'm having a hard time phrasing this. What issues are there that we know about that we know aren't fixed, but people might run into? And where should they go to provide more information on those? Does that make sense? Was that a clear
You
question?
mean regarding TensorFlow
Yeah,
or
yeah.
just in general?
Regarding TensorFlow, yes.
Yeah. So what we did notice, and we haven't, this is kind of something that we're still working on investigating. What we did notice is that on our continuous integration, we were having some out of memory issues. So we think that there might be an increased memory load, but preliminary investigations didn't really confirm this. So the like very rough profiling that we did, everything seemed okay, but could be that you might see some increased memory usage. We also have kind of a forum post where people can then share their experience. So if you do run into memory issues, or you do run into increased training time or increased inference time, then it'd be really great if people let us know so that we have more data points to work with. One thing we did notice is that inference time with language model Featurizer seemed to be increased. I don't know if that would be really noticeable to people unless they're actually looking out for it, just because it's on a per message level. I think it's a difference of like fractions of a second. But that's another thing you might see. But I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think it's mainly about the increased training and inference time for pipelines that have diet classifier with entity recognition turned on. That's kind of the main. And I'm hoping there aren't any other problems. If there are, then we definitely want to know about them. But all of our kind of usual unit and integration tests pass. So hopefully there's nothing major wrong.
And if you're looking for more information on that forum thread, it is this one, feedback of creating to TensorFlow 2.6. And if you're watching the recording of this video and you're like, I have feedback, please, we would love to have it. It would be super helpful for us, and I think everyone else as well. And there's also a link to this blog post that I mentioned where we talk about a little bit more about the benchmarking that we did. I say we, Felicia did the benchmarking. The Rasa team, by which I mean Felicia did, in order to sort of narrow down what some of the issues were. Some folks saying hi, hello, welcome to the stream. Yeah, so is there anything else that you wanted to share about, working with TensorFlow. Actually, I guess there's a question that I get sometimes, which is, why do we use TensorFlow?
As opposed to
Yes.
some other library? Is it TensorFlow versus PyTorch discussion, or because we do get that one? We do get that one occasionally. We onboarded an ML engineer. Actually, this is quite a while ago, earlier at the beginning of this year, and she was also a big fan of PyTorch. To be honest, I don't really feel strongly about the versions, or not the versions, sorry, the libraries either way. I do think that it makes sense for us to use a library just because a lot of the kind of, or trying to build this stuff from scratch, that's something that I had to do during university often.
Mhm.
And it turns out reinventing the wheel is not really a productive use of time unless you really have some great ideas for wheels. But that's not really our main focus at Rasa. So I think leaning on these libraries allows us to spend more time developing the things that are unique to us. And yeah, TensorFlow does a great job. It works well for us. I mean, this is a little bit of a hiccup, but I think that happens. So and they've been really responsive and good about getting on the issue once we raise it to them. So I think we are in general happy with TensorFlow for sure.
Huh. And I also think in terms of, I mean, we are an open source. I mean, Rasa open source is open source. We're an open source project. We'd love to have contributors. Um, and if we were building everything from scratch ourselves, it would be extremely difficult to contribute because you'd have to learn about like our weird one-off bespoke framework that we'd built. And if you know TensorFlow, which there are lots of really great resources out there for learning, then you can contribute much more easily and also build your own components. So a lot of folks custom build components for their pipelines that maybe we haven't built or we've built, but they need to modify them for their use. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. There are a lot of great TensorFlow resources, so that definitely helps. And they have their own forum and everything. So I think, yeah, it's definitely easier for people to pitch in, and also for people working here. So I wasn't a TensorFlow expert before I joined, but I felt like it was easy enough to ramp up. So
We have some more questions. Amina wants to know, where do you find the TensorFlow settings?
So we have a page on in our docs. I think it's titled Tuning Your Model. And we discuss a little bit about, I hope that's the right one.
Is it this one?
I think so. Maybe if you scroll down to the bottom, is there a bit on, oh yeah, here, there's configuring TensorFlow. Yeah, so there are some discussions there of things that you can specifically configure about TensorFlow. To be honest, I think for most people, it's more of an advanced usage. I'm not sure if it's really necessary to be messing around in the TensorFlow settings, just because I think the differences are probably minimal for most applications. One thing actually, and I didn't mention this when we were talking about what's different with 2.6, actually what's quite interesting is that they since 2.3 they've started more of an effort to alert you if you have set deterministic ops, but there isn't actually a deterministic implementation. So what I mean when I say deterministic ops is you can set it to use only deterministic ops, and in theory that would give you always the same results. If you run the same model with the same data, you're not guaranteed that if you don't have determinism. So now they're a little bit stricter about warning you if you set that and there isn't actually an implementation, but nothing's really changed about the behavior, because before it was just failing silently. So we never really had true determinism with any of these components. So it's not really that anything's changed, it's just warning, so that's, yeah. But then as far as like optimizing the CPU or the GPU performance, that's definitely more advanced usage. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's the settings that
I mean, was
of
asking about.
interest.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
A question from Ravi. Is TensorFlow used for intent classification? So for the utterance, I want a bike to rent in Los Angeles, the intent would be rent vehicle and the entity would be bike. So every user's message is converted into JSON. Do we use TensorFlow for that?
So that'll depend on what component you're using. I'm trying to run through them in my head and think of which ones. The main intent classifier that we were talking about, how diet classifier is affected. Diet is actually, it stands for dual intent entity.
Transformer?
Transformer, I think. Yeah. Well, I don't know. The point is that it's intent and entity recognition. So diet does, in theory, do both. You can turn off the intent classification or the entity recognition. That's what I was saying earlier. That's what you can do now to work around this slowdown that we're seeing. As far as other intent classifiers, I'm not sure if we're deprecating the keyword intent classifier. I think that one doesn't use TensorFlow. I don't know, Rachel, can you scroll down to the other intent classifiers? I'm trying to think.
Absolutely. So I'm just looking over here, features.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there's a couple that don't. Yeah. So the Mighty intent classifier also, I believe, doesn't use TensorFlow, and neither does the, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Learn, scikit-learn one.
Yeah.
And I believe the keyword intent classifier also doesn't use TensorFlow. So that, but I mean, the point really is that it's not all of TensorFlow that's affected. It really is just this one particular instance of diet classifier with entity extraction turned on. So you can still use diet for intent classification and then use a different entity extractor for the entity extraction part, or you can decide to live with the slowdown. And I think depending on the size of your model and how much training data you have, I think it might be worth a try to see how the slowdown affects you and your particular configuration. It might not be that bad. So I think that might be the first thing to check. And if you find that it's not something you can live with, then this is a decent workaround until we find something better. Or you could also decide to not upgrade to 2.8.9 and hope that, as I'm hoping, that we can figure out a fix with TensorFlow sooner rather than later. So,
yeah, definitely. And I know we talked a little bit about, as you've got, Amina's got some more questions. We mentioned a little bit the security issues, and I would say that these were major blockers for a lot of enterprise folks, people who are building big bots for work in production in large companies. They were like, you absolutely cannot keep using this TensorFlow version because of the security issues, so they had to upgrade.
Yeah, so they had to upgrade, like Vincent talked about in the blog post. These security issues did not directly affect us because they affect parts of TensorFlow that we don't use. So you don't have to be worried about security if you're running on the older versions. The issue is more that if you were using an automatic security scanning tool, then this would be flagged. So for people that have those constraints that they can't be using software that has these vulnerabilities, then that's an issue. But we did kind of do a security scan, and the vulnerabilities reported for the older TensorFlow don't affect us. So you can be confident about that.
Question from Amina. When is TensorFlow used in the process of creating a chatbot? Is it only in the config pipeline part, for example, so the NLU pipeline, or do we use it in other parts as well?
Yeah, we use it also in the policies part of the configuration. So we're using TensorFlow also for TED policy, for example, or unexpected intent TED policy, or trying to think, what am I missing? I think not for the memoization policies, but anything really that is associated, or we call them machine learning policies. I think those ones, although I wouldn't count memoization policy and augmented memoization policy, those aren't using TensorFlow. Although I think depending on your featurization, they might be using it indirectly, because it might have been featurized as a TensorFlow tensor. So I think we did briefly float the idea of kind of a light install of Rasa that doesn't use TensorFlow, or maybe doesn't use this affected part of TensorFlow, but we realized that it's pretty intricately intertwined, so that we kind of had to abandon that idea. So it's yeah, definitely throughout our code base.
Definitely, yeah. We're a machine learning product, and TensorFlow is what we use for machine learning. So there's a lot of it in there, and it's really, interwoven. We have another question from Amina, who always asks fabulous questions. About the settings, I just wanted to see what the default parameters are, so I have an idea. I don't want to mess with it. I just wanted to be aware of what I'm using.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. No, I didn't mean to say don't mess with it. I'm just saying, I think don't spend too much time messing with it. I think definitely get to know it and figure out what the settings are. But I think it can be kind of a rabbit hole where you think you're really optimizing things, but it's, and I'm guilty of this, which is why I'm saying this, you think you're optimizing things, but really you're just kind of moving the slider a little tiny bit from left to right. I think maybe the interesting TensorFlow related settings, I would say, because they are really Rasa settings that affect how we use TensorFlow, are in some of these policies and components that I was listing. So you can look into, for example, TED policy and change things like I think the learning rate, or you can go into diet and you can change the number of transformer layers and things like that. So there are definitely, I think those are maybe more interesting to explore if you're just trying to kind of learn more about parameters.
And I think it's somewhere in Rasa open source code what the sort of the default parameters are, and I'd have to dig through the file structure for a bit to find it. But it is there. I don't know if you know where it is.
It should also be, if you go, yeah, it should also be, if you go to, for example, TED policy, I think we do have, you might have to expand, this little table, but I think we do have all the parameters that you can configure, and like what, a brief little explanation of what they mean and what the default is. So that's something that should be useful, hopefully.
I have looked briefly and cannot find it on my very simple search. But yes, it is in there. You can definitely look at it, and we encourage you to if it's something you're interested in. Another question from Mina. What are the advantages of using multiple featurizers? I know the main job of a featurizer is to transform tokens into vectors, so it would be understood by the machine, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty good little definition. I think there are pros and cons to using featurizers or multiple of them, and each featurizer has, in theory, different kind of properties or reasons to use them. So I think if you're looking at language model featurizer, for example, you can get a lot of the benefits of what the underlying model, so that might be, I don't know, BERT or some sort of BERT derivative, probably, since those are the popular ones. So those have been trained on a lot of data, and usually with different tasks, and they learn representations of words or subwords that are useful for those tasks. And then if you are using these featurizers, then in theory, they can pass those things that have been learned onto your model. But that said, I think Vincent has a pretty good video on this, a YouTube video on like discussing the different types of embeddings. And I think his experimentation there kind of showed that, or suggested that oftentimes it's better to just work on your training data and improve that rather than trying to get exactly the perfect featurizer. But they definitely, I mean, they have different purposes and they can be useful for different things. So yeah, I think too many featurizers are just going to slow your model down. So I would definitely, be picky about which ones I add.
Great, good questions. So I'm just making sure I am checking all the chats. There's also a couple of videos in the NLP for Developers series on different featurizers, and I guess the benefit is that you can get more information. The part of the big trade-off is, are you actually getting enough? Are you extracting an appropriate amount of information for your problem? Or have you gotten more numbers than you need and you're just slowing down training time for no reason?
Yeah, that's a good summary. Yeah. So,
a question for Felicia from Imain. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Do you need to know math to become a machine learning researcher?
That's a good question. I think yes, I would say yes. I think I think no math is a difficult, difficult thing to quantify. I did have to take plenty of math courses, and I also think it helps. It's not just one of those things that you have to do because someone said you do. It does help to understand what models are doing under the hood. I think also what's really important about knowing math as a machine learning researcher is that it's also really good for communication. That might not be obvious, but it is, if you're trying to kind of express an idea and be very precise about what you're trying to express, then it does help to be able to do that. And I think that's something that you often, and hopefully always, learn in these slightly higher level math courses. You learn how to express yourself and how to kind of prove things and how to explain how you made a conclusion. So I think that is something that's underrated maybe, but also very useful.
Yeah, if I had to recommend like specific math to think about if you wanted to be a neural-based machine learning researcher, definitely linear algebra, because you're going to be doing a lot of matrix operations. At least a little bit of calculus, because there's a lot of, chain rule. And also, I would recommend some statistics training so that you can develop your intuitions about, populations and distributions and sampling. Like, you definitely know the basics of, distributions, and why we use them as like helpful mathematical shortcuts for stuff. Yeah. But I don't think you need to be like you don't need number theory to do machine learning. You don't have to go like all the way into the deepest crevices of math research.
Yeah, it's definitely like practical stuff. And actually, the statistics is a really great one. Yeah, so it's definitely practical stuff, and I think that's why I hesitated a little bit about no math, because I think I have people in my circle of friends and acquaintances that know math on a level that I don't. So it's all relative, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully that helped, I mean. All right. We have a little bit more time. So, I was wondering if there was anything in particular you wanted to let the community know about. So maybe about, um, new features that we've released since the last time you were on the office hours that you're really excited about, or I don't know, maybe a tip or trick that you've learned that you think people could really benefit from, or something fun you've read recently that you'd like to recommend. Is there anything you want to share with the community?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know what content you've put out on this, so I hope that this isn't repetitive for people, but I am really excited about conditional response
Mm.
variations. They just recently got promoted to a not experimental feature. That's always a good feeling. And I think the feedback we have gotten on them so far has been pretty good. It's just basically a great way to vary your responses based on conditions like is your user logged in, things like that. So I think that's pretty neat. It's not really something that you couldn't do before, but it's a whole lot easier now. So that's an exciting one. Another thing that came out of research is the unexpected intent TED policy.
Mm-hmm.
That one is pretty great. We're using that internally right now,
I
and
don't think it's in our docs yet. It's a little bit.
um, I thought it was, but oh, is it not on the?
Let's see. I don't think it's under policies. Let me double check. Uh,
Okay, well, in any case, I'm not sure if that one might still be experimental. I'm not sure, but we've been
oh, it
using
is.
that one. Oh, cool. Okay, it is still experimental. Yeah, we've been using that one lately internally for kind of a bot that we're working on for our own experiments, and it's just kind of a joy to have it flag something as an unlikely user turn, and you look at it and it is an unlikely user turn. So that's something that we've been kind of working on and talking within the research team about, like, how do you find the things where, or the points in conversations where things went wrong. And this is definitely a cool feature to be able to do that. So yeah, it's neat to have something that is also useful to us internally like that. It's kind of, because then I like to think that it'll also be useful for other people too. So
Definitely. Yeah, I think both of these will save a lot of time in writing stories for the or rules, I guess, for the conditional response variables, and then the unexpected intent policy should help you prioritize what you're annotating and make your life a little bit easier there, so you can start with the highest impact things.
yeah, that's a big one. I think it can be tempting to try and annotate everything or fix everything, but sadly that doesn't scale. So
Yes. And I always think about that when people talk about, Rasa assistants that are handling millions and millions of conversations every day. Like, obviously, you can't look at all that data, but also, maybe equally obviously, you don't want to just trust that everything is good and never check your data and never look at how the conversations are going. So I think this can really, really help with scaling. Um, Robbie says statistics is a sub branch of mathematics. Yeah. The phrase redheaded step cousin comes to mind. um, Maybe that's a little. Or just because in the U.S., often statistics departments are not in math departments. They're usually, uh, actually, often they're in like social science or sometimes even medical schools, because a lot of statistics research in the U.S. Is around epidemiology and medicine. But yes, I would
That's
say an
interesting.
imposter.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I mean, I would consider it a branch of mathematics, but I'm not really, yeah, I don't really have a great reason for that, I guess. And I think you find this that most fields, if maybe not all, benefit from statistics. So I guess,
Applied math also is the other thing it
yeah,
gets
that's true.
sorted out. Great. Well, I don't think we have any other outstanding questions. So unless you've got something else that you would like to share, I think we're probably good to start wrapping up.
Yeah, not that I can think of. Yeah, just definitely, we do want to hear, even if it's not positive feedback, we do want to hear people's experiences of grading, and yeah, hope that you trust that we're working to try and improve on this situation. So
Definitely. Yeah, and if anything else comes up, please head over to the forum thread, which is upgrading to TensorFlow 2.6 on the forum, and we'd love to hear your, I don't know, your experiences, good or bad, questions, comments. We're gonna do our best.
yeah, and I think also if anyone does figure out how to get everything running, then of course we're also interested to hear about that. So if you on an M1, sorry, I should have
Yes.
said. So if you do figure out the various dependencies, then I think especially other community users would really appreciate if you do share that. So
Yeah, definitely. Uh, Thank you so much for joining, everybody. Oh, we've got one last question from Amina. Do you recommend long stories or dividing into smaller ones?
ooh.
Is there a benefit for one way or the other?
It depends, I think, what you're trying to do. So I think I have seen people try to use checkpoints to have like story snippets. I wouldn't recommend too much use of checkpoints just because it'll slow everything down. But they can be useful in certain situations. I don't think there should be a drawback to story snippets as long as they're not too short. And that's kind of what I would lean towards just because I think it's a little bit easier to organize. It does, of course, you have to consider the max history of your different components. So if you have if you're relying on snippets fitting together in a way that doesn't work with the max history, then that is going to complicate things. Although I guess that might also be true for long stories. But aside from that, I would lean towards shorter stories just because I think that's a little bit easier to handle. And I do think you might see slightly better training times, but not anything significant, I wouldn't say. But yeah, no strong recommendations either way.
Yeah. I would say if you have user data, a story length that is representative of your users is probably what I would target. So if people tend to like come in, come out, get their question answered, and leave right away, then shorter stories are probably going to be more helpful in terms of capturing that behavior.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's kind of something that as soon as you have people, even if it's not real users, even if it's just you kind of writing stories in the interactive mode, then that'll help you get a good sense of what's a realistic story length. And those are probably going to be the best stories because really anything that you're handcrafting, it's very easy to create flows that aren't natural. So it's much better to just do it and see what flow comes out as soon as you can. Of course, I know you can't really do that from scratch, but.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your fabulous questions. It was great to have you. Head over to the forum if you've got anything else that comes up. You can also check out the blog post if you want to read more about Felicia's benchmarking. Yeah, and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific, so later in the day, for... I'm doing like a sort of a... I'm calling it live stream. Sometimes it'll be live coding. Sometimes it'll be sort of more like structured talks. And tomorrow we're going to talk about all of the sort of machine learning, not sort of, they are machine learning evaluation features that are built into Rasa, because there's kind of a lot of them. And I've realized in talking to folks that not everyone knows about them. So some tips, some tricks, some features that should be very helpful for you in y'all's work. All right. Thanks so much for joining today, Felicia. I think this was super helpful. I hope everyone's excited for this upgrade and upgrades to come. And fingers crossed on the M1 chip, but it's a little bit out of our hands, unfortunately. But we're working on it. So, thanks so much for joining, everybody. Thank you for making time.